In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 106 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is perseverance. Our quote of the day comes to us from Julie Andrews. Perseverance is failing 19 times and succeeding the 20th. It is an honor to bring you today's episode. Our guest, Yuri Kruman, is quite an interesting gentleman that has dealt with his fair share of challenges throughout his life. Raised by a single mother, 4 career changes, and dealing with a very young daughter diagnosed with cancer, he had every reason to give up, but he didn't. Yuri has kept going, remained positive, and today he is rocking his very successful business. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Yuri, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me on, Chris. It's really great to be with you.
I appreciate it. So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to make it happen today?
You bet.
Awesome. So the number one objective of our show is to both motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves. And I was curious if you had either a story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time where you could have given in or given up, but you didn't and you kept on going.
Yeah, I mean, quite a few stories up my sleeve. But one I would say that's most relevant to building my business was that about 2 months into starting Master the Talk Consulting, my 2-month-old daughter was diagnosed with cancer, unfortunately. So as you can imagine, that throws a wrench into just about everything, into family life and planning and everything. So one thing that this experience did for me is that it really helped me focus on my life mission and the values that are important to me, not just for myself, but also for people that I work with, for clients, for any kind of stakeholders, anyone that I work with. I really, it's very important for me to find the right people rather than, the richest or the smartest or whatever it is. So it's that clarity that sometimes comes from being thrown into, the proverbial deep end where, you really have to figure out how am I going to balance, let's say, lead generation with taking my kid to Memorial Sloan Kettering, or, how do I find a way to have my actual sessions with clients to help them, between everything else going on, putting kids in school and taking them back, things like that. So that's probably the most notable example.
Wow, how is your daughter doing today, if you don't mind me asking?
Thank God she's doing much, much better. She's been, free for, I think, about 10 months. So thank God, hopefully we're through that period.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations. So I need to ask you, obviously, I can't tell you I know exactly what you're going through, but I've had some friends and family members that have gone through cancer and similar things. I was curious, was there something that you were reading or telling yourself or perhaps putting in front of your eyes that helped you during this process to stay positive and focused on what you needed to do, not only for your daughter and your family, but for yourself as well?
I think the key is, not doing Dr. Google. That's one of the worst things. My wife tried that once and she just broke down. She was like, there's some horror stories. So that's not it. It's really speaking to people that are on the other side, meaning cancer-free, or, their kid has been in remission for a long time. It's really connecting. I remember we spoke to a lady whose daughter went through this. This is this is a type of cancer that occurs between 0 and 3. And for us, the most encouraging, most important thing was to just say, you know what, there is something on the other side, and kids live normally with this, and it doesn't necessarily affect their ability to even play sports or anything like that. So that alone was probably the most important thing. And then the other piece is just, really having an incredibly strong faith in God. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Well, I appreciate your candor, and I definitely can't say that I know what you were going through, but I think what you shared leads to the importance of having a faith in something. It could be God, could be family, could be friends, but also remaining as positive as you can. I think that is something that we hear often on our show is no matter what happens to you, no matter what you get hit with, is you got to keep going and try to be as positive as you can. And I'm sure you can attest to the fact that there were tough days, and we all have tough days, but the importance is to try to make more positive days than negative days.
Yeah, and I think more big picture, I think it's very important to understand that, you need to see whatever experience you go through, whether it's positive or negative, as part of your mission in this world. So for us, for myself and my wife, we really saw this experience as traumatic and difficult and everything else that it was, as part of our mission to educate our friends, random strangers that we meet that are going to be parents, just to have their pediatrician test their kids' eyes in a very specific manner. And I think that kind of focus on, I went through this process. Now my mission in life is to help others go through this process, is really something that empowers you. It really makes you see things in a more positive light. And it really pushes you very, very far beyond just being stuck in that moment when, you're on the kids' floor in Memorial Sloan Kettering and you want to crawl into a hole and die, basically. It can be awful.
Well, I appreciate you again sharing that with us. So I wanted to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So there are 3 components to my business. The first one on which I'm focusing more efforts now is Fortune 500 professional development work, meaning doing speaking engagements and workshops for companies that are really looking to transform the way they do HR, the way they attract, recruit, retain, develop, and create leaders from millennials in particular. I know this is a hot button issue, but despite all the kind of gurus and talking heads, there still doesn't seem to be much of a headway outside of maybe the top tier of tech companies in addressing this question in the right way, meaning not from the top down, but actually soliciting feedback and really trying to understand, what's the same about millennials with all the other previous generations. What is it that we want? And then also how it is that we can use whatever's different about us to propel us further. So that's number one. Number 2, I also do startup advising for early stage startups focused on PR, media, customer experience, and HR hiring. And the third piece is career coaching and executive coaching for mid-career millennial executives, usually looking to leave the Fortune 500, especially finance these days, to go to tech.
Well, you definitely have your niche, and I think it's important to have what we call different verticals, and you clearly have those 3 verticals. So I know you've done some amazing things, and I'm sure you're going to continue to absolutely knock the cover off the ball. So I wanted to ask you, how do you personally define success?
Success to me starts with being a good father, a good husband, really doing the basics, really nailing my basic daily routine, making sure that I take care of my most important people and take care of myself. Beyond that, I find success in helping my clients go through a transformative process, right? On the career side, for example, I don't just fix somebody's LinkedIn or resume or help them prepare for an interview. I really take them through a process of self-discovery before everything else, where I help them to figure out what is their life mission, meaning the specific intellectual problem they want to solve. I help them to nail down the values that matter for them, meaning if they look at people that they choose to spend time with, what is common to them? Let's say maybe they're kind or generous or hilarious or brilliant or empowering in some particular way. Then I help them to figure out what outcomes they enjoy delivering to others to improve the human condition in some way. Is that through delight, maybe writing music or code? Maybe it's through no-nonsense operation, meaning timeline budget, let's get this done. Some people are evangelists, meaning they recruit others to work with them, to invest in them, and otherwise solve problems. Some people are niche experts. Others are caretakers who empower a team of people to do their life's best work. And the fourth piece is role, right? So in any situation, rather than in any job, every person has a natural way of reacting. So if I come to you, let's say we're doing volunteer work, and I come to you and I say, Chris, I really need your help. I know you're the absolute best person to do this, to help me solve this problem, but you also love this more than anything else. So what is this? What do we call it? How do we define it, etc.? And then we also look at two other pieces which are very important. And those are what I call founding stories. Number one, founding stories look at any kind of formative experiences that you went through, usually before the middle of high school, sometimes later. Might be books that you read, maybe certain mentors, professors, rabbi, minister, you name it. It looks at what kinds of games you like to play. Is it role playing? Is it strategy? Is it word games? How is it that you make decisions? How do you process information? What people have you influenced and in what way, and what others have influenced you? And then we also look at negative scripts, anything sitting in the back of your mind saying, fear of failure, fear of success, ooh, shiny object, right? Or fear of missing out, things like that. And when you take those first four pillars, life, mission, values, outcomes, and role, you also have negative scripts and founding stories. You have a much, much fuller picture of who is this human before you ever talk about the professional. And the same goes for business, by the way. Go through the same exact process with entrepreneurs or in a workshop setting, right? Because before we can figure out where this person needs to go, what is their objective, you need to know who they are, where they came from, and then the tactics fall in place. So that's the bedrock of my process in those three legs of my business.
So I wanted to just touch on something you mentioned is the negative scripts. Is that something that in essence would be aligned with affirmations, or do you look at that differently?
It's not just affirmations. It's really looking at the deeper picture. There's always something, it's on the order of therapy, but really, really condensed and kind of just taking the stereotype out of it, because a lot of problems that people face are really banal, and they think that, I'm a special butterfly. I've gone through all of this crazy, terrible stuff, challenges, setbacks, etc. When they see that it's perfectly banal what they've been through, that there are hundreds, thousands, millions of people that have gone through the same thing and emerged successful, suddenly that mystique around, I'm a special butterfly and everything is happening to me, that victim mindset goes away. And then they're able to tackle the problems in front of them, challenge those fears of success or failure or whatever it is, and really focus on a process, using that process to get to the other side and measure success by seeing, am I in my dream job? Do I know who I am? Do I know where I'm going?
No, I appreciate you mentioned touching on it for a minute. So wanted to ask you, if you had to define yourself in only one word, what would that word be?
Perseverance. Beyond everything else is definitely perseverance.
It's a word that's not often used, but it's been mentioned a few times within the last couple of months, and I think it's important because it's definitely something that we talk about quite often on No Quit Living.
Yeah, without getting into too many details, you can ask me questions to that end. But essentially, between being an immigrant from the Soviet Union, growing up in a single-parent household, really having to figure out a lot of things, let's say about college applications and how to do a mortgage on our first house, then in college figuring out who am I, what am I meant to do, going through 4 career changes, and finally figuring out that my life mission is really to help others figure out their life mission, how to pursue it and how to monetize it. Throughout that process, it's just a lot of crazy ups and downs, and perseverance is really number one through faith in God, as I mentioned, and knowing that I'm meant to do something very specific here on earth. Even if I don't know it now, I will figure it out. That's what perseverance means to me.
That's a great definition, and I think you definitely have overcome a lot of different things, and I think we all do in life, but it's not the question of if you get knocked down or if you get knocked down again. It's how many times, and more importantly is that you keep on getting up and learning from those different experiences.
Yep. And you know what? The one thing I keep going back to, it's irrelevant whether you're wealthy, well off, privileged, not privileged, or you're on the very bottom of life in a way. There's always 3 things that you can work on. Doesn't matter what else is going on in your life. And that's thought, speech, and action. right? Between those three things, there's always a lot of work to do to get better at whatever it is you're doing, whether it's, cleaning the floors in your house so that, your kids don't pick up the muck, or, going for a moonshot and you're trying to get to, I don't know, maybe you're trying to get to Mars like Elon Musk. It doesn't matter. It's really trying to improve yourself at least that 1% each day. We talk a lot about this in self-improvement circles, but I've been on both sides where I'm going for the moonshot and I'm repeatedly failing. And I accept, on the other side where I accept my mistakes and failures and whatever, but I just do my best every day and I see massive results within a year, 2 years, et cetera. And that's what I've seen in my business.
No, it's something we talk about often and you mentioned the thoughts, speech, and action. For us with No Quit Living, the action is such an important piece because it doesn't matter what you read and see and talk about, is at the end of it, you need to take some action. So I'm glad you touched on that for a second. So one of the things we look to do with every show is to add value to our listeners. And I was curious if you have either a morning or a daily ritual that you swear by.
Yeah, very simple. The two most important things are putting everything back in the right starting position, meaning when I wake up, I do my prayers, whatever. I just express gratitude in a very fundamental sense. Thank you for the roof over my head, the bread on my table, my children, my wife, and everything I have. And number two is just being consistent, right? For me, maybe it sounds funny, but ever since I was a kid, I had a very acidic stomach. So what I do, I drink water, I eat a banana, and I eat yogurt. And that's my morning ritual, regardless of whether I'm in a rush or I can take my time. And that's that kind of consistency, which is very hard to come by sometimes when you have kids and, you have all these obligations, whatever. That is the one thing that keeps me through. It's that just very basic consistency every day.
Now, those are two great things. And I think what the most common theme to that answer to that question has been some form of gratitude, which I think is so important. And then I think you touched on something that we don't discuss every show, but it's the importance of being consistent. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that some of the most successful people or companies or relationships, it's not doing these amazingly huge, large things every now and then. It's doing the little things consistently all along. And you touched on something before that I wanted to just briefly mention, is trying to improve yourself 1% each day. I think a lot of times people look at the big result, whether that's losing 50 pounds or getting out of debt $100,000 of whether it's college loans or credit card debt or what have you. And it's paralysis by analysis. But if you break it down into that 1% each day, that's something that we all can do. So I'm glad you touched on that for a second.
Definitely. And this is something that I've learned from James Altucher. And of course, I'm probably familiar with this guy. Very interesting fellow. He bears his guts about businesses that he started that have failed, about marriage, divorce, kids, you name it. And for me, at one or maybe even two different low points in my life where I didn't even have a place to live. I was living between two friends' couches. Actually, it's the same time when I met my wife, who also didn't have a place to live. I remember reading James Altucher, and I was like, you know what? If this guy can bear his guts and he can tell this amazing story, why in the hell not me? Why can't I also emerge on the other side and be successful at something and know my mission and pursue it? Why not? And that's really something that helped me, because we often define success by what's on the other side of the rainbow. Like, oh, big funding round, massive number of clients, revenue, you name it. But all the stuff in the middle, very few people ever mention, and that's something for which I'll be eternally grateful to James.
No, he's quite an interesting guy, and I think definitely makes a lot of sense. And people look at the end result, and a lot of times they miss the journey along the way. So I'm glad you touched on that. So here's an interesting question for you. Assuming the 20-year-old version of yourself would have listened, what would be the one piece of advice you would have given to the 20-year-old Yuri?
That's assuming a lot, but I would say that, basically iterate faster. I think that's probably the most sage advice that I could give myself, because I've always been someone who wanted to improve. I've always been someone who tries to be curious and learn as much as I can. But it's not just about learning, it's about implementing and getting better. And that is in all areas of life. So it's not enough to just say, oh, I read these 100 books this year. It only matters if you implement the wisdom that you've learned. And that's something I didn't learn until much later when, life kicked me a few times and I had to get up from the bottom by actually implementing.
No, it's important, and that comes down to what we talk about, as I mentioned before, is taking action. Is you can read the best book, you could have the best coach or mentor, but at the end of the day, you need to take action or else you're not going to succeed in any area of life.
Absolutely.
So if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
You know what? I'd have to go with James. I love this guy. I know that, there's so much more to him than just even what he writes. I'd love to, get his perspective on other things in life that I find interesting.
No, it's interesting. This question opens up a lot of different opportunities to discuss different people and things. So obviously you have a connection to James, and I think it's important to want to connect with others. And I would say that if you have not connected with him, one of the things we often talk about is 1 degree of separation. So if you truly want to get to him, you definitely can at some point and in some way.
I'm circling, trust me.
So I was curious if there's anything you're working on that you'd like to mention or discuss with our listeners.
Yeah, there's a book I'm working on, which will hopefully come out later this year. It's called What Millennials Really Want in Work and Life. And for me, this is something that's been brewing a long time, partly because of my business, my own experiences, my own crazy story of changing careers 4 times and really not understanding where I fit. And I think for a lot of millennials, it's not that we're so different from previous generations. In fact, you see a lot of studies now saying, oh, they're catching up, with car ownership, house ownership, financial management, et cetera. I think that the one key difference with millennials is that we're trying to iterate faster, actually. We're less patient than previous generations. Partly that's because of that dopamine drip on our phone every day or Facebook or whatever. And we're just really hungry to get somewhere, maybe because we were held back by the Great Recession, maybe because we don't trust those institutions to push us forward. But bottom line is I'm really exploring what it is that millennials want from work and from life so that organizations will finally listen and implement both of those, not just listen.
No, it's interesting, and obviously it's a niche for you that is, I don't think, often touched upon enough, and I am in no way myself an expert with millennials, but there are some really interesting statistics, which I'm sure you know probably by heart, that I think a lot of companies need to kind of make sure that they understand, because it's important to understand the different demographics of generations, and obviously millennials moving forward, if you're a company, you want to make sure that not only do you understand, but you can talk about the 2 R's, which we talk about all the time, which are recruitment and retention. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So I wanted to ask you, Yuri, before we let you go, do you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think there's one principle that I learned also very belatedly, which I wish I would have understood and implemented earlier. And that really is, within reason, of course, everything is negotiable. And that doesn't mean that you go to a Middle Eastern bazaar and that's negotiable. But what I'm talking about is in communication, in any relationship, in any interaction, you can always find a way to add value to someone else and to derive value for yourself. And I think that for me, that drives my coaching, that drives my approach to any opportunity that I try to create by working with someone else. Right. So for me, before I can ask for something, I need to add massive value. And that opens the doors for me to then ask, I don't know, can you include me in your article or, I don't know, your book, or do you want to work together on this awesome venture, or do you want to invest, or do you want to advise, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, that principle has never been more relevant than it is in my business, that everything is negotiable.
No, I like that, and I like how you take that spin on that, because when you talk about negotiable, it probably means different things, but I love that concept of adding value first, and it's important that people do that, and I think in today's day and age, in 2018, I think unfortunately a lot of people flip that the opposite way, and they look at people or companies or relationships and say, okay, what can you do for me, as opposed to flipping it in the back, which you mentioned, which is who can I add value to and how can I add value first?
Yep, you just need to do things in the right order.
No, it's and easier said than done. So before we let you go, I wanted to just give you a chance to tell our listeners what's the best way for them to either follow you or connect with you.
Okay, so my company is called Master the Talk Consulting, which is found at masterthetalk.com. And feel free to email me directly at Yuri, Y-U-R-I, at masterthetalk.com. And I'm also, of course, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all those other places.
No, that's awesome. And again, Yuri, I truly, truly appreciate not only what you shared with us, but also finding out a little bit more about who you are and what you do. And I look forward to hopefully speaking with you soon.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to episode number 106. Yuri shared some of his personal beliefs when it comes to life, business, dealing with challenges, as well as working with millennials. While he was hit head-on by adversity, instead of stopping and throwing in the towel, he kept on going. When Yuri discussed his daily rituals, he spoke about the importance of putting things in the right place, gratitude, and being consistent. I think consistency is one of the best and often underused words when it comes to succeeding in any area of life. Yuri mentioned there are 3 things we can always work on: our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. Although in life we can't always control other people and what they say or do, we can control those 3 things. In his closing remarks, Yuri said something that really hit me. He said, before you can ask, you need to add massive value. In closing, I would like to challenge our listeners to ask themselves that exact question. Are you really looking to add massive amounts of value to others first? Or are you instead selfishly thinking about yourself first and foremost? As many of our listeners know, I stay away from religion and politics, but when it comes to paying it forward for all the right reasons, I'm all in. So as you go about your morning or your day, focus on others. Put their needs ahead of yours and choose today to add value to others as you go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.